Great. Good afternoon. My name is Julie Ty. I am president of the New York League of Conservation Voters. We are so excited for everyone to be joining us today. And I know we're excited to have this panel of mayors. We are here because we all support bold action on climate change. NYLCV joined our counterparts in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, along with the National League of Conservation Voters and state leagues across the country to demand that Congress prioritize climate change, high quality green jobs, and environmental justice in the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better package. We have a once in a generation opportunity to pass the most important climate legislation in American history, making critical investments in clean energy, clean transportation, and green infrastructure. The recent report from the UN proved that not only is climate change causing more and more extreme weather like heat waves, floods, and droughts, but also that human-caused emissions are to blame. It's more clear than ever that we need to act now before it's too late. That's why, as a coalition, we're pushing for bold investments in clean energy, clean transit, a resilient power grid, and supporting our natural resources. We need these investments to prioritize environmental justice and create good-paying union jobs, because our climate recovery and our economic recovery go hand in hand. And we're not doing it alone. Activists from across the country are sending messages to Congress and showing up for events like this to learn more about the Build Back Better agenda and to demand action. And our local elected officials are joining us in the call for a bold climate recovery. Cities are on the front lines of climate impacts, and mayors know firsthand that there is a heavy price to pay after extreme weather events occur, which is happening more and more often. From wildfires on the West Coast that are causing smoky skies here on the East Coast, to powerful rainstorms flooding our streets and our public transit, to aging utility infrastructure that causes blackouts. Mayors are left to deal with the effects of these impacts, and they know we deserve better. That's why the mayors are calling on Congress to prioritize people and our planet by making a historic investment in climate action, clean energy, justice, and jobs. We have to meet the scale of the climate crisis we face with big investments from Congress that help us build back better with justice and equity. Today, we'll hear from 4 mayors from the Mid-Atlantic region as part of the nationwide Mayoral Week of Action. Joining us are Mayor Gavin Buckley from Annapolis, Maryland, Mayor Ravi Bala from Hoboken, New Jersey, the mayor of my former stomping grounds, Mayor Kathy Sheehan of Albany, New York, Mayor Paige Cognetti from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we're excited to hear a few brief remarks from each of our mayors before we move into a Q&A. Our first speaker will be Mayor Gavin Buckley of Annapolis, Maryland. Mayor Buckley was elected in 2017, and he has overseen several improvements to the city's environment and climate resilience, including implementing short, mid, and long-term solutions to nuisance flooding at City Dock, increasing stormwater treatment, and partnering with the Mid-Atlantic off-road enthusiasts to create hiking and cycling trails on over 600 acres of city land at Waterworks Park. He continues to work towards 21st century transit solutions and an inclusive and sustainable future for Annapolis. Mayor Buckley, thank you for being here today.
Yes, sir. Julie, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for all the amazing work that you do for climate change. We, as you can tell, this is not a Maryland accent. I sailed into this town, into this beautiful town, over 20 years ago, and now I get to be the mayor. I come from a country that is surrounded by water. I now am the mayor of the state capital of Maryland, that is also surrounded by water, and it is one of our greatest assets. It's a great way to visit our town, but it's obviously one of our greatest threats. If I could go to the next slide. So Annapolis is about 7 or 8 square miles. It's a small city, beautiful historic city, one of the most historic cities in the country. It has about 22 miles of shoreline. So as you could understand, that shoreline provides many challenges. Next slide. We had 2 recent studies that showed that Annapolis, and our flooding problem is not from stormwater. Our flooding problem is from sunny day flooding. There was a NOAA study that showed that Annapolis has some of the highest frequency of sunny day flooding in America. There was also a Stanford study, an independent study, that showed that flooding is causing millions of dollars to our downtown businesses. Next slide, please. But not only are we dealing with sunny day flooding, and that is the flooding that comes from water being pushed up the Chesapeake Bay into the storm drains and then up through the grates and then into the street. But we are also dealing with land subsidence. So we are dealing with multiple problems at the same time. Next slide, please. We know we know that some of the populations that are affected by this the most are some of our more marginalized populations. Next slide, please. We have public housing, subsidized housing that is on the waterfront in the city of Annapolis. So I came into office and moved pretty rapidly to start working on one of our most marginalized housing developments, Newtown 20, and we are building that back in a more sustainable way. We are looking at microgrids, solar energy, tree canopies, many things that we can make sure that these communities who suffer the most when there is some kind of catastrophe have some of the best options. Next slide, please. If you have ever been to the city of Annapolis, you would know we have one of the prettiest parking lots in America. We have nearly 100 cars on the waterfront in this historic city. I'm trying to change that. I campaigned on a park, not a parking lot at our city dock. It is not only do we have a tarmac parking lot on our waterfront, but we have a place that when it rains in the summer, the water hits it, heats up, and then rolls into the Chesapeake Bay and has those negative effects on our Chesapeake Bay, one of our greatest assets. So we are looking now to Joe Biden, to the Build Back Better programs to help our city. Our city is a city worth saving. And our partner in saving the historic district is the US Naval Academy. And one thing that gives credibility to our claims, we all know, all the mayors here, because we're solution oriented, we know that the water's heating up and the water's rising. Some people question that. But what gives our credibility to our case is that the Department of Defense, including the US Naval Academy, are working rapidly to fortify the Naval Academy base and other assets around the country. So they are our partner as we move forward on a historic plan for the city of Annapolis. We are doing a $60 million infrastructure plan that will raise our city dock 6 feet and will create various barriers against sea level rise. We are trying to make sure that people know that this city, although it is historic, is on the forefront of dealing with climate change, is innovative. This city has one of the largest solar parks on a brownfield in America, non-government owned. We are connecting our city in multiple ways through infrastructure that will discourage people from getting in their car and encourage them to get on a bike or an electric scooter or an electric bike or an electric ferry. We're making sure that we utilize our waterways as a way to transport people around the city. So you'll be able to come into our town and get on an electric ferry and then go across Spa Creek and go to Eastport, ride around and come back on the other side of town on College Creek. So we're using the beauty of this city and its waterfront as a positive thing when we talk about the challenges of climate change that are ahead of us. Making sure that people realize that this addressing climate change is not a burden, it is a positive thing. It is a job creator. It encourages ecotourism. It makes people think about their city in a different way. We all have to do our part. It starts locally. I'm proud to be a mayor. When I go to mayor's conferences, the thing, and I'm sure all the mayors on this panel would agree, is that we don't sit around and we don't ask each other if you're a Republican or a Democrat. We ask each other what our problems are. And one of our biggest problems is how we're going to tackle climate change, how we're going to fund that. This is a moment where our federal government should step up, because we need to lead the way for the world. And I'm proud to be doing my part in the city of Annapolis. I'm looking forward to hearing from the mayors on this panel. And again, thank you for all you are doing. And I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I suspect we're going to hear more about flooding from our communities. I think, the West Coast is going to have droughts. The East Coast is going to have more water than we want. Thank you so much, Mayor Buckley. Next, we are going to hear from Mayor Ravi Bala of Hoboken. Mayor Bala was elected in November of 2017 after serving for 8 years on the Hoboken City Council. A longtime champion of the environment, he co-chairs the city's Rebuild by Design project, which is a $230 million program to protect Hoboken from storm surge events like we saw in Superstorm Sandy. He's been part of implementing the city's composting program, which is one that's near and dear to my heart here, trying to get that restarted in New York City, and committed his city to exceeding the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. In 2019, he signed the executive order launching the city's landmark climate action plan, which includes implementing electric vehicle charging stations, upgrading street and traffic lights, phasing in hybrid and electric vehicles for the municipal fleet, and introducing renewable energy for homeowners. Thank you for being here, Mayor Bala.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie, and thank you, Mayor Buckley, for your eloquent remarks. I'm now excited to hopefully visit Annapolis as well. As Scranton, I've been to Albany to take the bar exam years ago, but I've got 2 new cities to visit now. So Hoboken, just by way of background, and I'd like to also thank the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters for having me. Hoboken, by way of background, we're a population of 60,000 residents. The census numbers came out recently. We came out at just above 60,000. In terms of our geography and our space, we're about 1 square mile. So imagine that, 1 square mile with 60,000 residents. We are the 4th most densely populated city in the country. We face challenges with respect to development, but also managing our infrastructure and how that relates to climate action and climate change. As Julie just referred to, flooding, unfortunately, is a challenge in Hoboken. Hoboken historically used to be an island that was filled in through a historic fill. So it sits below sea level for a substantial portion of that 1 square mile. And we really, as was alluded to, felt the impact of climate change in 2012 through Superstorm Sandy. At that time, no less than 1 million gallons of water came into the city, breaching the north and south points of the city and filling up Hoboken almost like a bathtub, where about 80% of Hoboken was underwater. So this is really an existential threat to Hoboken climate change. We were listed, unfortunately, in an article as one of the top 10 cities that might not be existent or around or underwater in the next 50 years. So when I say it's an existential threat, it really goes to the city of Hoboken in the future years and generations. And some of the things that we're doing is really to get us off that list of cities that might be underwater in 50 years. And to that end, we've instituted a very aggressive climate action plan that seeks to meet or exceed the goals of the Paris Agreement. we have made sure that as a matter of policy, climate action and climate change is considered in every governmental action we take. We've tried and we've been successful in ensuring that all electricity for city-owned buildings is through the use of renewable energy. We're in the process of electrifying our city-owned DPW fleets and a whole host of other actions. But the real threat to Hoboken right now is the impact of coastal flooding, in addition to chronic flooding. The federal government is critical to the solution here, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we're having this conversation. A number of years ago, after Superstorm Sandy, at about 2015, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development granted Hoboken $230 million, $250 million, as the awardee of a design contest called Rebuild by Design. And what we looked to do was we actually looked to the Netherlands to look at see what the Dutch does in terms of managing cities that might be below sea level, and really trying to break that cycle of destruction and rebuilding. And how do we build a more resilient city, one that can break that cycle and one that can be resilient for generations to come? So out of that process came Rebuild by Design, where we are trying to address coastal flooding, that tide surge that resulted in 80% of Hoboken being underwater, through what's called a resist component, which would resist any storm surge, but doing it in a way through design, using parks where you wouldn't even know that there is a flood protection barrier that's in the form of a berm in a beautifully designed park, but that also serves the dual purpose of acting as resistance from coastal flooding and the effects of climate change. So that's the innovation behind this project, this federally funded, state administered project. We've had a great partnership with the state of New Jersey through Governor Phil Murphy and the DEP, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. They're implementing this program in partnership with Hoboken and HUD at the federal level. So it's a federal, state, local partnership, but it really seeks to integrate flood protection barriers through design seamlessly into the urban landscape here in Hoboken. This was a project that was highlighted on a national level on 60 Minutes, and we hope it's something that, once successful, can be replicated by other cities facing similar challenges. So that really goes to the point of, I think, the infrastructure bill at hand. The one passed by the Senate is I think, a good start. But to be honest, we need more. We really need more, as Mayor Buckley said at the local level. We don't talk about party affiliations. We talk about solutions that affect people no matter your affiliation, or if you have no affiliation at all. These challenges have to be met to meet the sustainability goals and really challenges that have been come upon us by climate change. So through climate action and through advocacy, starting at the local level with mayors, going through legislatures, and hopefully getting up there, with action through Congress, we can build back better. We can build back stronger. But in my experience as a first-term mayor, I've witnessed firsthand that I just can't do it alone, or Hoboken, or one city, or Scranton or Annapolis, Albany. We cannot do it alone. We need that partnership at the federal level. We have gotten that partnership in the past through Rebuild by Design. I mean, I think that's a great example of a process that's in action. We're in the construction phase of that project, but it's a very good example of how we can partner at the federal level through infrastructure dollars in order to mitigate the impact of climate change. So, there are a whole host of other issues and things we're doing at the local level, but I want to leave it to some of the other distinguished speakers to get to share their experience, and also once again thank the League of Conservation Voters for having this critical discussion at this moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think, both you and Mayor Buckley have both pointed out, this is not partisan. And this is clean air and clean water and fighting climate change are nonpartisan issues. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Mayor Kathy Sheehan of Albany, New York. Albany's 75th mayor, Mayor Sheehan, was first elected in 2013. Under Mayor Sheehan's leadership, the city has invested more than $100 million in park and infrastructure improvements across the city, with a focus on neighborhoods impacted by redlining and other discriminatory practices. Her innovative streetlight purchase and conversion program has reduced Albany's carbon emissions, improved pedestrian safety, and saved millions in taxpayer dollars. She joined mayors from around the country in honoring the Paris Climate Agreement, committing the city to a goal of 100% renewable energy by 2035. Additionally, she has actively worked to address water quality and combined sewer overflows by implementing green infrastructure and overseeing the renovations of over a dozen Albany parks. Thank you for being with us, Mayor Sheehan.
Thank you so much. And it was great to be here with you and with our fellow mayors to talk about this really important issue. August 5th, 2014, I was a baby mayor, new at my job. I was traveling around the city with our police chief, visiting various national night out events at various parks and libraries and other locations throughout the city. We were watching the radar closely because storms were threatening, but it looked like it was going to pass by Albany, when suddenly the skies opened up and it began not just to rain, it literally poured buckets and buckets of water. It was a complete washout. It lasted for probably about 30 to 45 minutes, but the amount of rain was just staggering. So the police chief brought me back to City Hall. I got in my car and started to drive home, knowing that all of the first night picnics had been washed out. When I found myself unable to get home, I was trying to drive out to the western part of the city and I couldn't get there. Streets that had never flooded were flooded. My street was flooded and I realized we had a real problem. So I made my way back to the police station. We set up an emergency command center and responded to unprecedented flooding that had happened throughout our city. It was unprecedented, but it was not a lone experience. As we reviewed what happened, where the flooding occurred, the amount of flooding that occurred, and then looked back, we saw that this was probably the 5th 100-year storm event that we had had in the past 7 or 8 years. We could no longer tell our residents that this was a fluke, that this was not going to ever happen again. It was happening, and it was happening with more frequency. And so we recognized that we had to do something about it. I attended some public meetings that were really hard, where people shared stories about the losses that they had had from flooding, the frequency of flooding in their neighborhoods. And as I and our brand new water and sewer commissioner, department commissioner realized, this was something that the city had known about for many years. We knew where the problem areas were, but we hadn't had the will or the funding to start to address those problems. And so we made some promises. We made promises to our residents that we were going to do something about it. And we have been working on that now for the past 8 years, creating more resiliency, because our threat does come from the sky. We are having these events that are much more intense, that result in much more water entering our storm sewer systems. and that require us to be innovative and flexible, thus the tens of millions of dollars of investment that we've made. You know, I've always been a believer that if you have a plan and you have a good team on your side, that you can find the funding to make the changes that you need in your community. And that's what Build Back Better is all about. We need to fund these innovative solutions that are going to save our cities, save our businesses, and allow us to adjust to the new normal. And so we have really aggressively addressed these issues. We've torn up baseball fields and built retention basins beneath them, and then rebuilt the fields. We've created wetlands, and we embarked on a $46 million project to end storm sewer overflows into the Hudson River. That was part of a consent order that we entered into with the State Department of Environmental Conservation, the city of Albany, along with a number of other river cities, to address the decades-long, centuries-long pollution that have happened in the Hudson River. And we use that as an opportunity to also address some environmental justice issues. And so we have a lot of innovative projects that are happening and investments that are happening here in the city, but we know that we are going to need more. We know that this is not a problem that is going to go away. And so as we think about our resiliency and think about what we need to do in order to address the historic issues and these new normals of big storms, we're really focused on what investments we can continue to make to allow for our city to be able to absorb those new storms. And then we're also addressing our contribution to climate change and focusing on what the future might look like. So yes, it's about changing out our old streetlight system to new, more efficient LED lights. It's also about electrifying our fleet and looking at innovations around some of our bigger pieces of equipment and how do we electrify those? How do we grab new technology and help to spur new technology? How do we help our regional transit system to electrify buses? We're creating an EV charger infrastructure in the city of Albany. Julie, as you know, parking is an issue. It sounds like it's an issue in Annapolis. Parking is always an issue in Albany. People complain about it, but we are going to have to take some of that parking and create opportunities for EV chargers and for a new way of thinking about what that infrastructure looks like, what our parking infrastructure looks like. We are the state capital. We have a city that almost doubles in size every day. So as we look at what we're doing in the city of Albany, we also have to have that regional conversation, because we could electrify our entire fleet. We could get all of our residents to buy electric vehicles, but if we still have, you know, between 80 and 90,000 people commuting into our city every day, we have to ensure that we're taking a regional approach to addressing these issues. I think the other thing that has been talked about by the other mayors is the idea of environmental justice. A lot of the challenged areas that we have in our city are also areas that are impacted by redlining, by lack of investment. And so looking at not only what we can do to strengthen that infrastructure and to repair many of the inequities that exist in those neighborhoods, that's one of the things that we're really focused on. But we're also focusing on how do we ensure that those neighborhoods benefit the most from the economic benefits of addressing global climate change. The city of Albany is fortunate in that our port on the Hudson River has been selected as the location for the very first US manufacturing facility for wind turbines towers. And we're looking forward to that 600,000 square foot facility being built here to build wind turbine towers for a large wind turbine project and connecting our residents to those jobs, those opportunities, and that future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And it is very exciting to have the offshore wind industry coming not just to New York's coasts, but also to upstate New York, which I think is really important to help spread around those jobs and see the value to all of us. And I can attest that I remember when I bought my house in Albany, my mom asked if it had parking, and I said, it's not even my criteria, Mom. But I was able to park in my office. I was very lucky. Our last speaker will be Mayor Paige Cognetti of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Perhaps you've all heard of that. Our president is from Scranton. Mayor Cognetti took office in January of 2020 after serving as director on the Scranton School Board. Mayor Cognetti's leadership has seen the city invest in repairing broken infrastructure and commission an engineering study to address, you guessed it, flooding issues. Under her leadership, the city has restructured the Bureau of City Planning to focus on urban planning, pedestrian and bicycle safety, and connecting Scranton's downtown to its vibrant neighborhoods. The mayor has worked to make Scranton part of the country's economic recovery and infrastructure revitalization. Thank you for being with us, Mayor Cognetti.
Thank you, Julie and Mayors. It's so great to see all of you and hear how connected we are, which we know. But as I sit here, you know, the water that comes through Scranton eventually sees Mayor Buckley in the Chesapeake Bay. And the Amtrak route that I am very much trying to get back online after 50 years of no passenger rail actually ends in Hoboken. That's the hope. So Mayor, maybe we can work on that a little bit. But we really are so connected. And I think that listening to all of you and the strides you've made is inspiring for me. Here in Scranton, we are nicknamed the Electric City. In the 19th century, we were on the forefront of transportation infrastructure. We had the first ever electric streetcar. Sadly, at this point, we only see those tracks when we have to dig up for some water issue or the utility company goes in to dig a new line. We have fallen behind like so many areas in our country. And the president, you know, being from here, I think he knows what a city like Scranton used to look like. I think he saw some of it failing when he was here, 50, 60 years ago. And we have an obligation, it's a moral imperative that we get these packages passed and that we continue to get to work to correct what's happened before and make sure that we're keeping our economy and our residents safe. Julie mentioned flooding. We have huge flooding issues here. Scranton is also has lots of different nicknames, but we were built on coal mining, really. We are literally on top of coal mines. I just bought a new house and I have mine subsidence insurance because there are coal mines underneath. So we have a lot of really complicated flooding issues because not only do we see we're in the bottom of a valley, we see all of these new and worsening storms, as Mayor Sheehan mentioned. They're getting worse and worse, and they're all running into Scranton, and they're running off just recently in the last 15, 20 years off of pavement from developments, you know, on the hills behind us and above us in other townships. So we're continuing to push for a new stormwater infrastructure as a region. It's an uphill battle. Unfortunately, there's a lot of education that needs to happen. I think that's where groups like the League of Conservation Voters really come in to help us. And we have a regional mayors group that's trying to figure out how we educate our population as well. We're going to need to do this work, but there's a lot of pushback and there are a lot of false narratives around stormwater and why it's important or not. I think to most people listening here, it's a given that we should maintain our stormwater infrastructure, but it's not for some. And these infrastructure packages, especially this one that Congress is looking at right now, we have to get these dollars in because I know that we won't be able to find a regional solution if we can't seed fund it, run the pilot, get those studies done, show that what we do will help mitigate the flooding. It will help people not have their basements flooded, not have their businesses flooded, not worry about getting home, not worrying about the future of their entire neighborhood or entire city. We need to prove that concept. Sadly or not, we do. So we need these funds to be able to continue to do these things. So looking forward to continuing to advocate for that. On the electricity piece, I know President Biden was in the Lehigh Valley in Allentown visiting a factory recently. I think it was Mack Truck, actually. They're producing all electric garbage trucks. So we're on our way on some of these pieces, but we know that we have to have the funds at all levels to make sure that we're focusing on it. I think this new package would make some school buses electric. We again need to make sure we're doing that because we have to reach those new solutions. We have to be on a more sustainable path for everything, but transportation is a big one. And being the electric city, we're doing what we can. We're putting in more charging stations. We're trying to get this. We have studies done. We're now pushing for bike lanes to try to figure out how we have a more multimodal community as we used to have. So for us here in in Scranton, it's not, it's a mix of the past and the future, as it usually is. And we're lucky to have the economic underpinning that we have. But in some ways, you know, those legacy costs are there, and we need to build on that. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the future, and hopefully with some of this investment, we can again be on the forefront in some way. There are some things that we missed along the way as a result of many different things over the past decades. So we're hoping we might be able to use these funds to leapfrog on some of the pieces that we need, like, you know, LED streetlights, things like that. There's neighborhoods here that never even got streetlights, so we might be able to put some things in that will really increase the quality of life while creating jobs, and also, you know, helping us get toward the climate justice that we need to see, and again, solving for that moral imperative as we look at and read, especially last week with I think it was the UN piece. We have to act very, very quickly, and I'm grateful to, again, the League and then all my fellow mayors for working so hard as we work to do this.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I can tell you, and probably Mayor Bala can tell you, shared bikes are a great way of getting around town. I had a breakfast meeting this morning and I took City Bike, and it's just fantastic. We're excited about school bus funding as well. That's a big priority, I think, you know, for us across the entire league. And we're grateful for the funding, because we know that that's a challenge for school districts right now, because the cost parity isn't quite there yet, but we know it is something that'll come along. So now we want to turn to Q&A. So we want to encourage our viewers to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom to weigh in, but we have some questions already, and we'd like to start out with a question for everybody. You know, for constituents who may just be learning about the Build Back Better agenda today, why does it matter? And you've talked about this a lot, but why does it matter in your city right now? And what kinds of benefits can your constituents in particular see if it gets passed? And Mayor Cognani, you're front and center on my screen, so why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think our most immediate is the stormwater piece, that there's so much political pushback on the more conservative side of the spectrum here in northeastern Pennsylvania. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. I'm from the Willamette Valley, so I'll never understand, but it's there. And I know that it's something that we need to solve for, and we need to solve for it with action and proven concept. Words are not going to matter. That's why this bill is so important, because it will give us the tools we need to prove this concept, make sure that the water that's coming from northeastern Pennsylvania down to Mayor Buckley and Annapolis is clean, and that we're all able to have a safer, cleaner environment.
And how about you, Mayor Buckley?
I think, you know, our obligation is to obviously leave this planet, our cities, better than the way we found them. And so federal money is going to be necessary. We know most of our municipalities, our revenues are flat. The challenges that are ahead of us to deal with this are way beyond most of our budgets. And the reason we send Washington money is so that it can come back at the right time. And I think this is one of the most important moments in history now. We should be aspiring to be the greatest generation. We should be aspiring to eradicate COVID, to reverse climate change, and we know what it's like because we're on the ground. You know, many people know what sea level rise is going to be like because we deal with it every day. It's up to our ankles in many occasions. We've come up with a short-term solution for that, but it's not just about the water heating up and the water rising. It's also about that weather event. You know, what way is the high pressure system going to be spinning over Norfolk? Is it a full moon? Is it you know, what is going to push water up the bay and then challenge all of the mayors that are on this call today and all of our mayors around the city? So that infrastructure dollars is beyond what we're going to be able to raise on our own, and we need a federal partner.
See, we had the combined event of a high tide and a full supermoon when we had Superstorm Sandy. So certainly, Mayor Bala and New York City here, we can attest to that. So Mayor Sheehan, what about you? What do you see? Why does this matter to your city right now, to Albany? And what kind of benefits do you think your constituents can see if it's passed?
Well, look, I think that when you look back historically, every major infrastructure investment that has been made in this country has resulted in economic growth. Now, we may look back on some of those investments with a little bit of regret, right? We made it possible for cities to sprawl, and we're now seeing the climate change impact of that. But the reality is that from canals to railroads to the highway system, we have spurred economic growth when we've invested in infrastructure. And so I don't really understand the reluctance or the concern about it. I hear what my fellow mayors are saying. We experience it here. There's skepticism by some across the country. But I think the reality is when we look at what can happen in a city like Albany, a city of just under 100,000 people, although I don't quite believe the census results. We were 99,200 and I'm bitter about it, but we did grow. So, but here in this city, we are building a 600,000 square foot wind turbine tower facility that is going to create really good paying jobs. And so this is about growing our economies, preparing for the future. And we need to get out of the way, I think, of the skepticism and look back at what innovation has done and spurred in the past. And I believe that it will spur that same type of growth in the future.
Right on. We're all about the jobs and making sure that we're taking full advantage of this. And to close on this particular question, Mayor Bala, how do you see this benefiting people who live in Hoboken?
I would just briefly add that the reason why this is so urgent, this the fierce urgency of now is because we're observing, as Mayor Buckley said, on the ground, rain events at a much faster clip that causes flooding at a much greater pace than we did just 5, 10, 15 years ago. So we're literally in a race with, on the one hand, more severe weather events that are happening on the ground that we're all experiencing, and then advancing and advocating for infrastructure that would address and mitigate those events. So it really is, and if we don't act now, future generations will suffer the consequences. So we do owe it to future generations to see what's happening now and to really plan for the future.
Great. We all need to be forward-looking, that's for sure. So I want to get a little bit more specific. So Mayor Buckley, we've talked about this a lot, right? Annapolis has experienced the largest increase in nuisance flooding of any American city in the last 50 years, which is saying a lot given how much flooding all of our communities have been facing throughout the Northeast. How specifically will Build Back Better help the city mitigate flooding and other effects of climate change? And what will the process look like to help as you come up with projects to address those issues?
So we tried to be creative on how we solve our specific plan for the historic district and partner with the US Naval Academy. But we've trying to get as many tools in our toolbox as possible. So we are doing a P3 with our garage. We are adding parking capacity before we take away parking on City Dock. But we are adding parking capacity that has versatility, where we can convert its flat floor plates on the garage. We can convert it in the future. There are solar panels on the roof. But the numbers are so staggering that I think that you have to have a federal partner to fund these things. We have $140 million budget. It might be a small budget on other people's standards, but that's a big number for a local municipality in Maryland. But it doesn't put a dent in what we're going to have to do. Now we're going to take care of two miles of our 22 miles in this thing, and then we have to look to the rest of the city and how that's going to get funded. But the thing that's going to come out of this is multiple benefits. Not only will we be creating a barrier and protection for our historic city, but we'll be creating a public space. We'll be filtering stormwater as it hits. We'll have programmability out of the area, and we'll be a more desirable place for people to live and work. And so the benefits that we will get from this and the jobs, we're making sure. I always look at that picture of the guys building the Brooklyn Bridge back in the day, and I must think that kids that knew that their granddad did that must look back and go, God, that my granddad was part of something like that. And we are making sure that the local jobs that are created through this, and we're using Section 3 practices as well to make sure that people that need the jobs the most are involved. So not only do they get to the benefit out of it, the job training, the job, the skills for the future, but they get the ownership out of it. And so, but we're going to need the federal dollars to make it all happen. So
great. And it's good to hear about both local hiring and sort of the public-private partnerships that are out there to try and help leverage dollars. So Mayor Bala, Hoboken is embarking on an aggressive plan to address flooding by building parks and other green infrastructure to better manage stormwater. And being on the other side of the river, I greatly appreciate that. It's a lovely view that we have. How will the president's plan help Hoboken implement your plan?
Thank you. We have embarked on a roadmap to address not just superstorms or severe events, but the chronic flooding, nuisance flooding or chronic flooding that's been more severe in recent years. And we've done it through an open space agenda, where we've built what we've called resiliency parks. We built our first Southwest Resiliency Park a few years ago, and what that does in that case is that we've integrated or constructed an underground water detention tank that can absorb 250,000 gallons of stormwater in the event of a rain event. We also built another park more recently at 7th and Jackson that would absorb 400,000 gallons of water subsurface. And this is, of course, in addition to above surface green infrastructure like rain gardens, permeable pavement at those parks, all of which helps absorb rain and mitigate flooding. Our newest park, which is under construction, once complete, through funding from the DEP and the iBank, would actually store 1 million gallons of water in the event of a chronic flood rain event. And all of that goes to keeping the water subsurface, allowing our sewerage authority to treat that water before it's actually discharged in the Hudson River, and doing so in a responsible manner.
Stormwater and managing sewage properly are always hot topics on the environmental space, for sure. So Mayor Sheehan, we've talked a lot about flooding. We also have issues with extreme snow. We know that in March of 2017, over 17 inches of snow fell in 2 days, leading to serious issues on some of the city's more narrow streets, which I can attest to, having lived on one of those very narrow streets. And in December of 2020, 23 inches of snow fell in a matter of hours, filling the city's snow docks and requiring the city to find extra space to dump snow removed from the streets. How will the Build Back Better agenda help improve Albany's infrastructure and create a resilient city when you're dealing with storm events, not that just our water, but also are dealing with snowfall?
Well, after the unprecedented snowstorm that we had in December, my concern was just like with the rain, that we're seeing weather do different things than it did in the past. And, we don't have the equipment to be able to clear streets when the snow is falling as quickly as it fell in that December storm. We just simply don't have trucks that have enough ability for our narrow streets to be able to push that much snow. So it created a lot of challenges. And I think, you know, as we think about resiliency, it's almost like they're two separate conversations, right? You know, we can talk about resiliencies and investments in resiliencies, and then there are some who say, well, maybe we should be investing that same amount of money in reducing our carbon footprint to try to address what is causing climate change. And I think we have to do both. The reality is that in order to reduce emissions, that's a worldwide problem. And we have to focus on that, and we need innovative solutions, and we need legislation that forces us to do that. I think that our policies in this country have not caught up with where we are. We do not pay the full cost of a gallon of gasoline when you factor in the environmental impact of that. So, you know, I'd love to have that conversation, but I also have to plow the streets. So in reality, we need to be looking at, you know, what types of storms we're actually addressing. We have to set a different level of expectations, I think, with respect to our residents about the impacts of those storms and how we can realistically be able to clear snow. You know, people expect to be able to get in their car after a blizzard and, you know, drive to work or drive to the doctor's office. You know, I talk about hurricanes in the South and the devastating impact that they have. And yet up here in the Northeast, people think, oh, I, you know, had the equivalent of a hurricane, but I should be able to go right back to business the next day. So we have to set some different expectations. And then we have to, I think, be really focused on this equipment that we need in order to plow our streets and to deal with these issues needs to be electrified. It needs to be, you know, it needs to be adding to sustainability, not, you know, causing us to have more heavy equipment moving through our streets and, you know, adding to the climate problem. So, you know, one of the things that I've said, and I know I've gone on too long here, but, you know, I would love to see the federal government really focus on specific areas, like let's electrify all of our school buses, right? I mean, I'd love to see us get something done that we can point to, that we can focus on, that the industry knows that the investment is going to be there, and that we are going to find a way to electrify all of our school buses, right? Diesel fumes are a huge environmental issue, especially in our lower income communities. So I'd like to see some focused investments that we can all as mayors grab onto across the country and say, we're going to accomplish this thing. And whether that's electrification of buses or electrification of our fleets. But that's one of the things I think would benefit not just our city, but our country.
I think that's terrific. I know that's something that is a huge priority for the League of Conservation Voters across our entire movement. And we also want to see, I think, electrification of all of our transit buses. And Senator Schumer has been pushing for the Clean Transit for America Act, which would do just that, on top of the money that's proposed to help with school buses. So that's something we know would help everyone, and is an excellent lead in to our question for Mayor Cognetti. Because as you mentioned, Scranton has long been at the forefront of transportation innovation. And you already identified you had the first electrified streetcars in the 19th century. Tell us a little bit more. You talked a little bit about some of the work you're doing on EVs, but how are you trying to lead the way on clean electric vehicles, and how the federal government could help provide investments to transform transportation in Scranton once again, and how we can create jobs associated with this?
So on the electric vehicles front, we've been putting stations around, and we keep kind of pitching it and talking about it and getting excited about it. But it's just one piece really of highlighting what the diversity of our transportation used to look like, and pitching that we need to make that our future. Now, this effort to get Amtrak here to get a passenger rail back, we had that until 1970, and then in the last 50 years, it has ceased to exist. It's been great to be able to really get excited about that, have that layered on top of the electric vehicles piece, have that layered on top of our great bikes community and helping them and working toward having those bike lanes and pieces be layered onto our transportation. We're also doing a lot of work on the city to make our streets safer. Julie, in the intro, you mentioned our connectivity efforts between downtown. Scranton's got a great setup where we're downtown is right in the center, and we have all of our neighborhoods around us in this valley. So we're working on connecting out. Everything's connected, of course, by roads, but the sidewalks and the safe walkways have dwindled over time. So we're really trying to show that a thriving economy and quality of life for the future really is hinged on all of those different transportation modes coming together. And of course, the subtext that we've got to get away from every single person needing a vehicle. We know that that's just not economically feasible. We are leaving people out of the economy. We saw it in the pandemic that people could not get to work if they didn't have the mass transit routes. Some of those mass transit routes were sparse during the pandemic. They weren't able to work. They were at home instead of at work, or they couldn't get their kids to daycare. I mean, all those economic injustices that come with a lack of a good transportation system. We're trying to attack that on all fronts. The big piece, the big shiny piece is let's get Amtrak to Hoboken and New York. But those little smaller things, fixing the curbs on this and rehabilitating all the crosswalks, those little things really matter. They matter to families in our neighborhoods. And it's all part of kind of one stack of things that we're trying to do at the same time. And obviously this legislation would help us with many pieces of that, but I would echo Mayor Sheehan's posit that we should make sure there's something we can really bite into at the end of this. And I think as the Mid-Atlantic region, maybe those of us mayors in this region could get together and do something like that should these bills pass.
That's great. And we can attest to how efficient and good train transportation is here. There's no one who uses more mass transit than New York City, which is where I am. And we love it. And we're happy to see money for Amtrak as part of the bipartisan bill. But we really hope that there's more available for mass transit and train travel as we move forward in the much bigger Build Back Better initiative. So one of the questions I want to ask everyone, and we've touched on this a little bit, but really we know that climate change and environmental pollution have long disproportionately affected low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. What will it take to ensure that the Build Back Better agenda benefits Brown, Black, and low-income residents of your cities? So Mayor Bala, do we want to start with you?
Sure. We understand the issues of climate change and environmental justice. Unfortunately, Superstorm Sandy impacted our low-income communities, public housing in the western portion of the city at the most severe impact. So we understand that, and we've experienced, unfortunately, that the impacts of climate change have disproportionately impacted underprivileged and underserved communities here in Hoboken. That is a huge focus, not just in legislative initiatives, but in litigation that the city's initiated against big oil, against the producers of fossil fuels, and a commitment to reinvest any remedies from those challenges into the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by climate change. So, creating that nexus between climate action and the disproportionate impact that it has on underserved communities within the context of Build Back Better and prospective legislation, I think is critical on a very practical level to what we've experienced in Hoboken and what we also look to do in the future.
Great. Mayor Buckley.
So this is President Biden's Roosevelt moment. We are working on a pilot in our communities, and it's a spin of AOC's Green New Deal. It's a green WPA. WPA stands for Works Program of Annapolis, and we're getting kids involved in the environment and making them recognize that it's a great career, that there are multiple opportunities in the environmental sector, and I'm sure many of you see that with your experience. It is lacking diversity in many of these panels we end up being on, or the groups that we end up meeting. And so we need to bring it to the communities. You know, some people don't have the luxury of thinking about the environment because they're just trying to survive. But if you make it about a future, a job, a well-paid job, I think that people can see the multiple benefits that can come out of that, and also obviously being part of something bigger than yourself, and that is, you know, saving the planet.
That small thing. Mayor Sheehan.
So, you know, I think that, you know, there's a long and disgraceful history of public housing being located in areas where the impacts from pollution and environmental damage have really had a disproportionate impact. And so I think we have to look at, as we replace outdated public housing, doing that in a way that also takes into consideration, you know, what will help our families to be able to maintain their homes, right? How do we reduce not only the environmental footprint, but how do we also make it affordable? We've built public housing that has green roofs. We've really looked at what we need to do to, you know, have much more effective insulation and windows. But then I think we need to go a step further as we think about new programs, because, you know, we are not, have not moved forward with this, but certainly there are those who think that we should build into our code that all new construction has to be electrified, no natural gas, you know, no more oil heat, that we're beginning to solve the problem, and thinking about the future. You know, we have a very old, we were founded in 1624, so we're a very old city. So we have very old housing, and so to be able to do that, particularly in our lower income neighborhoods, is going to cost more, and we have to figure out how we are going to pay for it. We can't put that cost burden on the backs of our families that have been historically discriminated against because of the decisions that were made in the past.
That's completely true. We have really, we got to find ways of getting around that. And Mayor Cognetti, to close on this question.
I think some piece of this is to take a lot of the funding that we might be getting and prioritize the neighborhoods that are underserved first. There might be some of these pieces that we want to do in these neighborhoods first, not in our downtown, for example, so that we're showing that we want to be solving these problems, and really prioritizing those communities. I think the green public housing is something that is a good idea, because that marries a goal of ours with our recovery funding, with our green infrastructure goals. We haven't built new public housing here in a very long time. We're looking for ways to have our public housing, you know, really work for everyone, and we're looking for ideas for that. But I think building some of this green infrastructure into that, putting people that are, you know, in public housing at the forefront of some of these things, getting them excited about this, especially the kids. These kids know, I mean, we all know, like, the kids are more into this than we are. They're the ones that are going to be around. So really prioritizing those communities, especially the children, I think is important.
That's great. And certainly public housing, it's not just about the efficiency of the buildings, but it's also about the quality of indoor air associated with them. So it's a nice combination to address public health issues. We have a bunch of questions from the audience, as you might imagine. You know, all of you have mentioned about working across party lines, and several of our attendees, including Larry Holman, have asked similar questions. But how can we bring more people, including those who may not currently support climate action across the country, into the fight to reduce our carbon emissions and make our communities more resilient? So if anyone has ideas, I would welcome. I'd throw that to any of the mayors. Does anyone want to volunteer to go first? I've been choosing, but.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. You know, I think the impact of climate change and its existence is self-evident. But I appreciate that some people might not agree or might not take that perspective. So I guess the question is, how do you incentivize climate action for a segment of the population that might not appreciate the urgency of the issues we're discussing today? And one obvious tie-in is the creation of jobs and building up our economy. That is an objective that perhaps would be more appealing to certain segments of the population. And if we can create that connection that President Biden has done with this infrastructure bill, that it's going to create jobs, which is going to improve our economy. And that's not a bad thing. And that might be one way to leverage more meaningful discussions about the impacts of climate change with people who might not appreciate them as much as yourself, Julie, and some of us on the panel.
And I think it's also people who are concerned about losing their jobs in fossil fuel industries have new opportunities. I think that is really important. And we're seeing that here in New York. Do any of the other mayors want to weigh in on this question about how do we bring more people who are not currently supporting climate action into this in a way to make our communities more resilient? All right, I can move on to other questions.
I mean, I think, look, I'm a bleeding heart liberal, but I think what hurts us is we can't insult people's intelligence on this one. And we have to try to make it about our children. And I think that, and trying to stop the tribalism we see in the country. And I think you don't see it on a local level. We don't do the things that we see federally, locally. We disagree. I run in the morning with Tea Party guys and Trumpers and bleeding heart liberals, and we bust on each other, but we have a cup of coffee afterwards. And so I think, trying to get together and have a beer with each other and sort of explain our positions, but really make it about the future and what planet we're going to leave for our kids. I will be coming to all your towns to have a beer with all of you as well. Yes, thank you.
That's a way. We sometimes have happy hours. We're doing an offshore wind happy hour to talk about jobs, actually. So sometimes bringing people together to have a beer is in fact the answer. All right. If nobody else wants to jump in, I know Mayor Sheehan, you talked about how you were working with the chief of police to talk about snowstorms and how you're addressing issues. And one of our viewers, Linda, says, the mayors have talked about their epiphany moments when you saw the urgency of climate change and rebuilding our infrastructure. And how are city governments engaging with residents and businesses to share the local benefits of the infrastructure work you're undertaking and to show people how investments can benefit everyone? Have you seen any residents or businesses have epiphanies of their own? So we'll start with Mayor Sheehan, and if anybody else wants to jump in, that's cool.
Well, I think it is making sure that people understand the local impact, right? It is about jobs, it's about opportunity, and it's about solving centuries-old problems that have resulted in poor water quality in the Hudson River, for example, sewage seepage that's happening in certain areas of the city because of the aging infrastructure. And so every time we have the opportunity to fix a problem and do it in a way that either makes us more resilient or addresses climate change, it's really helpful. When I started this streetlight buyback program, that was about climate change. But what really resonated with our residents was that we were making our streets safer because the LED lights are brighter, they direct the light down more. And as we started to install them, people were really appreciative of how much safer they felt walking down the sidewalk. And then building into that the fact that there are nodes on each of these new streetlights that allow us to attach Wi-Fi, cameras, other innovations in the future, it became more about creating a better community, creating more amenities for the community. So I think that's also what, as we, those of us on this call love to talk about climate change and what we're going to do, not only to address climate change, but to make ourselves more resilient. But sometimes it's really looking at the direct impact that people are going to see right away. I mean, I agree we have to talk about our children, but often sometimes it's if somebody can really grab onto that and see the impact of it and the positive impact that it's having, in real time. I have found that has been a helpful way of really kind of reframing the conversation.
Sure, you're kind of getting multiple benefits from similar types of projects, and I totally agree. Sometimes people need to understand that there's a different reason for doing it. It can serve two purposes while people are coming around on this. Although I do think voters we see are caring more and more about climate change. And I think we saw that in the election last year and in polling that's been done on what voters are thinking about these days. So, Mayor Cognetti, like many cities, Scranton is contending with the issue of replacing aging lead pipes that pose a threat to the health of children. Can you talk about why it's important to address this issue and how the federal government under Build Back Better could help with that?
Just as we were talking about our lower income housing, our public housing being unsafe. Maybe it's not structurally unsafe, but the indoor air quality could be unsafe. There's pieces of those buildings that we worry about. We certainly worry about lead pipes. We worry about just lead paint itself. And we know that we can't possibly attack these issues on our own. We just are never going to have the tax dollars in our budget for these types of issues. Our school district is separate here. We're two separate organizations in the city of Scranton. They've had some issues there and have very helpfully gotten to use some of their CARES funding to be able to attack those issues. But the way I see it is we're really starting with the schools, and then we've got to go out into our housing stock and mitigate these issues. So there's no way that we can do that without federal help. We'll just never have it, in our budget. So get the programs, the type of funding that we can get there is really important, and also just the playbook for it, right? We don't have the bandwidth to run the lead pipe, lead paint mitigation playbook ourselves. So we are looking to other cities. I was just in Lancaster, Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago. They've got a HUD grant to start to tackle some of these issues. So we'll be trying to follow on any of the Build Back Better funding with potentially some support from HUD and support from other cities that have been doing this.
Sheehan, this is an opportunity for you to talk about your idea.
You mean with respect to
the HUD funding, the problem with HUD funding? Yes.
Yeah. So, we received a pretty large HUD grant to do lead abatement in apartments and in houses, but it can only be used to abate lead paint. And it seems to me that if we're abating the lead paint, we should be abating the lead pipe, especially the pipe that goes from the lateral into the house. And so I'm really talking to HUD about a much more comprehensive approach to lead abatement.
So I already see an opportunity for mayors here to be working together to help make it better, to help improve housing for low-income people and improve public health. Mayor Buckley, you have been a small business owner. And one of our viewers, Catherine, wants to know, what is the role of the private sector in climate mitigation and adaptation in your cities?
I think we have to stop pointing the finger at one another. We can't say environmentalist good, developer bad, resident good, business owner bad. We all depend on one another. And we know we have to leverage the private sector to help with the infrastructure challenges that are ahead of us. Any developer will do the things you ask if the numbers are right. So we should be thoughtful on how we structure those partnerships, but we should recognize the benefits that we can get. And I can point to several projects in this city that had zero stormwater retention, and now they have over 100% stormwater retention. I can point to developments where we've made them pay for parks or traffic lights, or bike paths. And those moments you shouldn't just shut them down. So we have this kind of vilification of one group or another, and we should all realize that we are in it together, and that we should take advantage of those moments, and get the infrastructure help that we need, because the dollars are so big.
Agreed. All of the above. We need all of the above to fight climate change. We're going to need individuals to take action. We're going to need government to set policies and invest, and we're going to need the private sector to help us execute all of that. Mayor Bala, this is one that's really near and dear to my heart. Hoboken has a single-use plastic bag ban. New York State does as well. I've written about 20 versions of that bill before it became law. And Catherine, Logan asks, we're glad to hear all of the work that's being done to mitigate the impacts of climate change and all the infrastructure work that you're doing. One of the things that we know about a lot is plastic pollution. How can cities go further to reduce plastic waste and disposable products that lead to pollution? And frankly, right now, primarily rely on fossil fuels.
Sure. I think the change would be essentially incremental. We started with a plastic bag ban that would allow people to use, would eliminate single-use plastic bags, but still allows the use of what's called reusable plastic bags that are a little bit thicker in nature. Obviously, the evolution would be to completely transition out of all plastic use for bags, for environmental reasons, for quality of life reasons, the type of street clutter they create. And transition into what I do, and other residents have found very adapted to, is simply go to the grocery store with a few bags that are not plastic and that are reusable, and that this is just a matter of cultural habit that we have been able to transition, in a very refreshing way, quicker than I had ever thought, in a way that's kept our city cleaner, that's helped the environment, and has created a different culture in Hoboken, where it's really awkward to go to other cities and see a single-use plastic bag. And if we can create that culture, through government leadership, it can have a real impact on the quality of life for our residents as well as our environment.
It's great. There's so many other things, like, why people didn't used to drink bottled water, right? People used to go to the tap and get water from the tap. So there's a lot of different cultural things that have occurred through the years. This is a follow-up to two of you. So Mayor Buckley, it was a follow-up to your discussion about the Green WPA, and Mayor Cognetti, as a previous school board member. Kim, who's a high school teacher in New Jersey, is asking, can you highlight climate change related work in your school districts? What role can young people and educators play in solving the climate crisis?
Me first. Well, I want to thank the educator, whoever's on the line, because they really do open our children's eyes to this. I don't obviously, I think, like Mayor Cognetti, the school district, the school management is in the county's hands, so we don't play a part in that. But we definitely try to bring kids into the mayor's office, and get them involved in the various departments that are addressing climate issues. We elevated a deputy city manager to be the deputy city manager of sustainability and resilience in the city. So one of the most important employees in the city is in the sort of highest position, so that they know that the environment is a real priority here. So making sure that the kids see government doing the responsible thing and leading the way in these sorts of things. And so we bring kids into the city. We try to involve the schools whenever we can in projects at our city dock. If you do one of the Green WPA programs, you get a t-shirt that says Green WPA, you get a certificate for this cleanup you did or the plantings you did. You get a $50 Amazon card, so we don't expect the kids to do it for free. They get paid for the work that they do because they're helping the city. You know, we're working on these ideas, and we're always up for new ideas. But thank you to the teacher that put the question forward.
And before we go to Mayor Cognetti, I'm just curious, did Amazon donate those?
No, we
All right, well, we should work on that. We should work on that.
Well,
Jeff Bezos has a lot of funding out there available for contributions. So might be an idea to think about.
Yeah. I mean, on the Amazon thing and on the packaging thing, I mean, when people come here from other countries, they are disgusted with how much wrapping that we use just for our fast food or for you know, we have no styrofoam I'm in the restaurant business, but still I'm always floored by the amount of plastic that we produce and the wrapping and these sorts of things. So you ask for a plastic bag in Australia and they look at you like you tried to kill one of their children, you know. So they you know, changing the mentality is a challenge. So thank you for what you've done on that front, but we still have a long way to go as a country, right?
We do. Extended producer responsibility. We're working on it here in New York for packaging. All right, Mayor Cognetti. What's happening in schools and how can we engage children and educators more in solving the climate crisis?
Well, I think when I know there was a question earlier, how do we bring people that don't want to get this or don't understand this? How do we kind of bring them into this stream of action? I think that kids really are the solution, not just us at our ages thinking about kids, but really the children themselves being the ones to talk about these things, learn about these things in school and take those things home with them. You know, I could stand next to a podium and talk about the need for stormwater mitigation all I want, but it would be far more impactful and far more meaningful if somebody's child comes home to their kitchen table and starts to talk about the things that they've learned in school. So there's pieces of curriculum that I think, you know, that's not my, I'm not part of the education system, but I do think that we need to work and to get more curriculum there. I love what you're doing in Annapolis, Mayor. We need to do some more programs like that here in Scranton where we can, as a city, can help partner with the district to get some of that education out. But I really do think it's going to be the kids learning that's going to change hearts and minds for those that haven't understood where we're at yet.
I think that's so true. I worked at the State Department of Environmental Conservation for over a decade, and we found that fourth graders are highly effective on recycling in particular. It's like they will go home and they will tell their parents what they can and cannot put in the recycling bin and make sure that they're doing it. And it's a really good opportunity to look at addressing food waste and composting. Those are things you can do right at school districts and really teach people to start, to your point earlier about changing a little bit of culture. You know, it's not that hard, and it's really a resource and not a waste. So Karen Cancer, one of our viewers, asks, are each of the cities working with your neighboring cities to help get changes done? And I know, Mayor Cognetti, you've mentioned reaching out to some neighboring communities. So I don't know if all of you want to touch base. I know Mayor Sheehan is working with the pool, as they're known, the pool communities. But if you each want to sort of touch on some of the things you're doing regionally, since this is not easy, something easily done alone.
Just in northeastern Pennsylvania, we have a mayor's group that so Lackawanna, Luzerne County are the most populous counties in the region. So the mayors from Luzerne, myself, and we're pulling people in slowly but surely. We're working together towards some of these goals. Again, the stormwater piece is the biggest. It's the biggest thing that we need to tackle, but we can maybe get some of these smaller ones along the way.
Mayor Sheehan, you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, you know, the pool communities are communities that were having stormwater runoff directly into the Hudson River. So they're the river communities. And when we were faced with having to abate the challenges and the level of pollution that was occurring, The decision was made really before my time, but it has continued to do that collectively and to find the most impactful projects that could reduce stormwater runoff the most, and then pool our funding to make those happen. And so it's been a successful model, and we've moved forward with it. We've had no hiccups, and it's been a really impactful way to deal with stormwater runoff and pollution. We have a capital region planning a commission that does regional planning, and so we as mayors and town supervisors are part of that as well, to really look regionally at how we can address growth and climate impact of that growth in more effective ways. And that's another great tool and resource that we have.
Great. Mayor Bella.
Yeah, with Rebuild by Design, that's a project that focuses on Hoboken, but also includes our neighbors to the south, Jersey City, as well as Weehawken, which is another municipality that was impacted by Superstorm Sandy. So it's a project where 3 cities are involved, and my colleagues at those cities are also at the forefront of that project. And I know that the DEP is also working with different collections or different regions throughout the state on tackling a number of these issues. Within Hoboken, there's a collection of about 5 different municipalities regionally in North Jersey that they formed to develop a plan to tackle some of these issues. So there is a regional collaboration here in New Jersey.
Great. And Mayor Buckley.
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to have come in on a wave with our county executive. I came in 17, he came in 18, and we ran a pretty strong environmental platform. And we've moved forward with a thing called the Resilience Financing Authority. It was an idea born in this city. It's similar to a stadium authority, where you give municipalities the tools to generate some of their own money, to tackle the resiliency challenges that are ahead of us. So we brought that to the county, worked with the county. We had to get it enabled by the state. So our state partners had to be a big part of that. Now, anywhere in Maryland, you can set up your own resilience financing authority, and then you can fund that with whatever you choose, whether it's 0.5% on your hotel tax, or whether it's a permit fee on something like that. Not directly, for us, if we can put a little bit on the tourist, it's a little bit more palatable for that. But it wouldn't have been done without a great collaboration and a great partner in the county. And I know many of us have those challenges when you might not see eye to eye with your county executive, but I have a great one and a visionary one in this area. So I'm lucky.
We have the great fortune of our mayor and mayor of New York City and governor not always getting along. So we're familiar with that. This is our last question, and I'm sorry we're running a tiny bit late, so I'll ask you all to be very brief on this, even though it's a super important question, because we have Karen from New Jersey and Thomas B. who have asked very similar question: is what is the best way for grassroots organizations and volunteers to have an impact on climate change policy? Protests, boycotts, calling representatives. What can we, the people, do to help? Mayor Buckley, you're first on my screen, so I'm going to ask you first.
So I think obviously get the right people elected, right? So make sure you know what your person stands for. Make sure that they deliver on what they say, and if they don't deliver on what they say, then vote them out. I think that we've got a very conscious group of mayors here that I've looked at some of the programs that they've done. I love what I'm hearing. And so I think that it all happens at the ballot box, doesn't it? It's the most important thing you can do, and that's vote.
As a voting organization, I'm really happy to hear you say that. Mayor Cognetti.
In addition to that, we need more people to come to city council and county commission meetings. that's where those meetings are televised. The press always writes stories about those instances. If we had a more steady drumbeat of residents coming to talk about climate change, and more specifically, obviously, stormwater is very much on my mind. If we could have more public comment in those public meetings, that would be really helpful.
And you know what? We've started a campaign with other colleagues of ours, Yes in My Backyard, which is what we need on renewable energy, because often people think that when government is proposing or advancing a permit, that it's got the go-ahead, and so all you hear is the small minority naysayers. So you need people to come out and say yes to things too.
Absolutely. Perfect.
So civic engagement is all abound. Mayor Bala.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Mayor Cognetti said, citizen involvement is so critical to creating change. Sometimes leaders don't lead, and then if leaders do not lead, it's incumbent upon people to take action and fill that vacuum. I will tell you that unfortunately, in today's world, some politicians are afraid of their shadow. If they get calls or emails or a few people show up to a meeting, don't underestimate the impact your voice can have in a civic square. If you make yourself heard, if your leaders are not leading, make your voice heard, whether it's at the ballot box, as the mayor of Annapolis said, or the public square, because I think that in my experience here locally, it has been a very effective form of effectuating change.
We're going to need a new phrase for this, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? It's like we have to stop putting our foot on the gas pedal. We're going to stepping on the accelerator. Mayor Sheehan, to close on this question, what can we, the people, do to get more engaged?
Well, I would like to say that when you have a leader who does get it and who does want to engage in climate change, that you partner with them and that you really reach out and sit down and start to problem solve. In the city of Albany, you don't need to protest, me about climate change. What I need is your help in figuring out how do we prioritize it. How do we make sure that we are putting environmental justice at the forefront? How do we get this done? And so, it's rolling up our sleeves and doing the work. And a lot of the really great ideas that come from the activists, I think then can become policy when we strategize and work together about how to actually get it done. Understanding where the resistance is, how we address that resistance, and what we need to do in order to be able to get that change across the finish line. So I would say for those of you who have mayors and leaders who get it, it's about helping them to strategize how to actually get the goals accomplished that you are fighting for.
Great. Thank you so much. That gives us all some work to do. I want to thank Mayor Bala of Hoboken, New Jersey, Mayor Buckley of Annapolis, Maryland, Mayor Cognetti of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Mayor Sheehan of Albany, New York, for participating today, for all the work that you're doing on the ground. When it always changes screens, it puts you away from your talking points. We hope that you're taking today and turning this into climate activism. We hope this is just the beginning. We hope you will take action and write to your member of Congress, asking them to ensure that climate action is included in the final infrastructure package. We need to be big, we need to be bold, and we need to be investing in our communities. We have a link available on the screen, and I think we're dropping it in the chat that has a letter that you can use to send to your member of Congress. Again, I want to thank all of our mayors who joined us today, as well as the 16 other mayors across the country who are part of our campaign's Mayoral Week of Action. I especially would like to thank my partners, NJLCV, CVPA, and Maryland LCV, for all of your work and your partnership in helping to get this done, and to all the staff who are doing all the work so that I just get to show up and be able to moderate this panel today. We hope you will join our movement by following us on social media using the profiles available on the next screen. And we hope you will enjoy the rest of your week and participate in climate action. We will be sending this around, and it is available on all of our Facebook pages. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.